word Nirbhaya means she who is without fear. But the truth is that every girl in this country lives in fear, including myself. Fear for her safety, fear for her well-being, fear of being raped, groped, molested, assaulted, to name a few forms of assault. Hi, my name is Aaliya Waziri. I am an advocate at the Delhi High Court, and I'm here to talk to you about a couple of things that hit very close to home. I think as women, we all carry pain, and that pain is intensified when we think of Nirbhaya. I was just speaking to Deepshika, the editor at SheThePeople, and we both sort of bonded over how, despite age groups, despite caste, creed, religion, any of those intersectionalities, Nirbhaya was such a tipping point. It was something that hit so close to all of our hearts that every time we think about it, a shiver runs down our spine. But the other thing that Nirbhaya also did was it, from a legal point of view, it pointed out the lacuna, the loopholes that exist in our legislation and our laws. And to be able to address you all, to be able to give this talk with something important in mind, it is only right that we trace how far we have come from Nirbhaya. Have we delivered on the things that we had promised post Nirbhaya? Now, to begin with, I just want to make it clear that the IPC, the Indian Penal Code, the section 375, which deals with rape, is expressly worded to cover only women. In other words, there is an inbuilt presumption in the provision which assumes the victim to be female and the male to be the accused in a rape case. Now, many of us know that in the aftermath, right after Nirbhaya, a 3-member committee was constituted by Justice Verma. Now, this committee pointed out some glaring loopholes in our legislation that existed for a long time, but nobody really bothered filling them in or strengthening our laws. The reason this committee was constituted was to accelerate the process of remedial change, remedial justice, and also enhance the punishment for those accused of sexual assault. The definition of penetration, which is something very technical but is helped rape prosecutions immensely, is that the definition of what constitutes rape was extended to include any form of non-consensual penetration of a sexual nature. Not only that, the committee recommended reforms in respect to workplace harassment, sexual harassment at workplace, acid attack, trafficking, child sexual assault, verbal sexual assault, so on and so forth. But I think the most important thing that I would like to talk about is the fact that no change occurs in isolation. We can have amendments. See, India, to be honest, has been a very progressive country since the beginning. We had universal adult franchise for women at a time when women in the UK were still fighting to be treated as women in their own rights, as human beings in their own rights, people who can determine who a government can be. But in 1950, as early as that, 51, I think, that we gave universal adult franchise to all citizens of the country, regardless of their gender. We have had the Maternity Benefit Act, something that the US doesn't, which prefers that women be deemed outside the workforce as mothers at home, people who are not contributing to the GDP of a country. But when we have an incident such as Nirbhaya, the first thing that we have to understand is that any change, legislative, administrative, institutional, it first requires a change in mindset. What do we do? A change in how we think, a change in how we react to particularly gruesome, abominable, heinous situations. Do we try to negate the situation for what it is, to be preach about toxic Western values influencing our careers, influencing our youngsters. Sorry, um, and in this situation, as I was saying when we were discussing earlier, it could have been anyone. It could have been any girl. It could have been me, the you. It could have been absolutely anyone taking a bus from Dwarka. Um, so the first thing that we have to do is, do we condone the insanity of rape and shame the victim, or do we acknowledge that the fault lies in us as a society? If our measures of retribution, of punishing those who are to be blamed for an event, if our measures of retribution are not strong enough, how can we then effectively, adequately, successfully reprimand and set an example for others? What Nirbhaya did was, it set an example for others. Of course, it instilled fear in us, in women. But after the Justice Verma Committee was appointed, it instilled it instilled an example of what will happen to those who commit crimes so heinous in nature. So if we are tracing the legacy of what Nirbhaya left behind, of the incident, the first thing that we can talk about is the fast track courts. Now, it's one of the major institutional changes that were set up after the Nirbhaya. The fast track courts were an institutional mechanism that were recommended by the 14th Law Commission. Essentially, they look at only heinous crimes committed against women, children, senior citizens, so on and so forth. In right now, I think there are about 1,800 fast track courts in the country, but they have a huge pendency, which is about 13 lakh. Now, that is something that we have to also understand, that just having a mechanism in place is not enough. We have to do more to make sure that the mechanism's wheels churn, that the mechanism is delivering, that the mechanism is efficacious, it's effectively delivering on what its preamble is. After that, the second thing that I want to talk about is the institution of vulnerable witness courts. If you were to go to a, let's say, Saket court, I hope no one goes to, but in case you would just visit it, there is a separate complex known as the Vulnerable Witness Deposition Complex. This is done to make sure that when there are witnesses who are extremely vulnerable, let's say somebody who is speech or hearing impaired, or when the victim is a child, or these are considered people who are vulnerable witnesses. The notion behind having in place a vulnerable witness courtroom is to cater to a safe environment and to respond effectively to the needs of who are vulnerable witnesses. This is done so that the criminal justice system responds proactively with sensitivity towards enabling a conducive environment so that the trial process is less traumatic for them. The third thing that I would like to touch upon is that post Nirbhaya, now there is compensation or monetary relief, we may call it, to the victim of sexual assault or violence or rape. Now, this is done to so that it's a step towards rehabilitation and restitution of the victim. The National Legal Services Victim Compensation Scheme was constituted by the Women's Victim Compensation Fund, which is a segregated fund for disbursement. And there are a host of factors that are considered when awarding compensation, such as the severity of crime, the gravity of the offense, whether the victim was disabled, with the expenditure that is incurred through medical treatment, the relationship of the victim to the offender, whether the incident was one isolated incident or whether the abuse took place over a period of time. Um, so there are all these mechanisms in place that have brought major um, institutional relief post uh, post Nirbhaya. If we are to view that it's almost been a decade now, the incident occurred in 2012, and we've just entered 2023. So it's about the first decade anniversary of Nirbhaya. It's a time to understand where we stand in terms of legislative reform post an incident that shook us to the bone. um, After that, the second thing that I want to talk about is the profiling of victims. Having mentioned all the gains and losses in the decade that has passed since Nirbhaya isn't enough. I think we need to do more than that. The women and girls of this country deserve more than that. What we need to do is introspect on both a personal level and an institutional level where we have gone wrong. How did we stray so far away from the path that was laid down before us in the aftermath of Nirbhaya? Could we have done more? If the answer is yes, there is still time. There is always time for legislative reform. We can make up for lost time. We can do more to strengthen our laws. We can raise awareness. We can have more advocacy to have a robust system in place that does not allow for procedural lapses. The word Nirbhaya means she who is without fear. But the truth is that every girl in this country lives in fear, including myself. Fear for her safety, fear for her well being, fear of being raped, groped, molested, assaulted, to name a few forms of assault. The question that I would want to leave you with is that are we as citizens informed enough? Will we cater to this change, or will we wait for another incident to shock us and shock our collective conscience? I leave you with that.